So I want to have what feels like a million slides. I'm going to try not to go too fast, but I want to share with you all a bit about my process. I'm going to share images of past work, and then I want to talk about a couple of ongoing and upcoming projects. And a disclaimer, I'm really open to talking about my techniques. I don't know if there are any weavers in the room or people who are interested in how this works. I really like the idea of sharing knowledge as opposed to keeping it hidden, so feel free to ask any questions and I'll share that with you. And you'll see the work if you haven't already, that's in the exhibition there. I work with a lot of really slow, monotonous techniques that I love. I work with spinning, so I'll make some of my own yarn. I use a wheel and a drop spindle. I'm also making pigments using a combination of natural and synthetic materials. It's not easy to forage materials in Brooklyn, New York, but I can in certain cases, but mostly I'm getting things like cochineal or different barks and other organic matter from the internet so far. And then I'm also working with synthetic dyes, mostly fiber reactive dyes. And then, of course, I'm a weaver. I work with a technique that's slightly different than the type that the workshop here is using. I'm making structural weaving, working with draft patterns, as opposed to working in tapestry. And for any weavers in the room, I have a couple of looms, but my primary one is an 8 harness, 36-inch shaft, which is an American brand. I've recently gotten into the knitting machine, and if you are curious about the knitting machine, I encourage you to give it a try. It's really fun. Some of the pieces that are in the exhibition I made with the knitting machine, and I found it to be quite different from my practice as a weaver. It's been really freeing to experiment with a new technique, but with similar materials. And then I'm also working with conductive materials and electronics. I'm not by any means an electrical engineer, and I'm learning it as I go, especially with the help of so many collaborators and friends who have experience with this stuff. But I sort of started from a conceptual standpoint being interested in where technology and textile overlap, and that has brought me to working with soft but still electronic materials. And then lastly, I'm an educator, and Antonia mentioned I'm an adjunct professor at Parsons and NYU, both in New York. Being an educator and communicating with students and anyone else is a big part of my practice. And I'll say that while my sort of day-to-day is mostly working on creating objects, I find that the work I do in engagement is the most fulfilling. So workshops, 2 of which I'll be teaching here over the next week, and other opportunities to engage with people. It just really feels like an essential component to my practice. These are photos of students and some other collaborators, people that I've worked with all around the world in different projects. Okay, I want to show you some photos of some large-scale pieces. These are installations. I have a handful that we'll look at. Again, they're using those techniques that we talked about before. I'm spinning the yarn, I'm dyeing the yarn, and then weaving it into these constructions. I use a process kind of like ikat. About 12 years ago, I did a residency in Japan, which was really cool, and I'm really lucky I got to do it. And I got there and I thought, okay, use this Japanese technique. It turns out I just do an American version of the Japanese technique, which is a much slower, more simplified version. But I do hope to be able to perhaps return there and learn a bit more about the intricacies of this thing called ikat, because there's just so much potential with it. And then the panels that I'm hanging are all interconnected there. Here's another photo of a similar installation. For the technical weavers in the room, you might be curious how I'm doing this. In different installations, I've done it 2 different ways. One is simply taking the warp threads from the panel that sits on the floor and one by one with a tapestry needle, bringing it through the panels that hang. And then in other cases, not this one, but maybe the next one, I'm actually using a technique called double cloth, where you can create multiple layers of cloth at once on the loom, and I can sort of strategically connect them or interconnect them, so when they leave the loom, then they're intersecting one another this way. This installation was made with the double cloth technique. So here there's believe 9 panels that hang, and then a 10th one that goes between all of them. The photos here show it on an exhibition in Brooklyn, but I ultimately sold this piece to a collector, and this is where it hangs in their home, so it's kind of cool, I think, to see it sort of translated into different spaces. And you can really only buy this kind of art if you have this kind of house, I think, for multiple reasons. But I'm really glad that it gets to live there and be enjoyed by the people who live there. So yeah, you can see here, there's a photo of me installing it early days of the pandemic, I'm realizing now, because I'm wearing that mask. I think it's like a sawdust mask because we couldn't get them. But anyway, you can see the detail of the panels that are connected. And in many cases, the installations are so big that you can sort of walk in between them and find yourself below or amongst those threads. This is the largest one that I've ever made. It's about, I'm still working on my metric system, but it's about 20 feet long, 20 feet high. So it's pretty large, and it's photographed here inside an old paper mill in Michigan, where I was an artist in residence last year. And then I also make pieces that go on the wall, a few of which are in the installation there. And again, I'm using those techniques with weaving, spinning, and dyeing, both natural and synthetic. I really like working with a blend of materials, ones that are highly natural, both in their process and their materiality. In the process, in the sense that I might be making it myself. I'm, one step short of owning a sheep, but hope to one day have that opportunity. So I'm spinning that yarn, and I'm going through these slow, monotonous historical processes, but then I'm also mixing in really highly synthetic materials, both in the dyes and in the yarns and fibers themselves. So conceptually, I'm interested in where those two things intersect, because of course the synthetic stuff doesn't come from the moon, it's also natural. In a certain way, we could think about it. It might not be organic, but it comes here, in the same place that we might find the natural stuff. It's just behaving in a way that we forced it to. So I like that as a metaphor to talk about other things. And this idea of something that's either natural or synthetic presents a binary, but of course we don't live in a world with binaries, we live in a world with spectrums, so there's so much that can land in between those two things. So I use that blend of materials in order to have this conversation. Here's more photos of these pieces. The one actually up on the left there is in the gallery here. And I think of them as semi-site specific, so I'm stretching them and hanging them in a slightly different way everywhere that they live, which is really fun for me too. One of the things I love about working with textiles is that it's got a really clear framework. We've got to start at the beginning and go through the process step by step. There's a lot of rules, but once you sort of know them and you understand your tools and materials, there is so much innovation and freedom that can be found within that framework. For me, I'm not as excited by blank canvas because I like the journey that textiles provides. And I can spend all those many hours on my wheel or on my loom thinking about these concepts and these bigger things. And by the time, a million hours passes, I've come to some kind of conclusion about what I might like to say, even though I'm often working in abstraction. Recently, I've been thinking about different ways to show and display the textiles. It is something I love seeing when I go to see textiles in exhibitions. There's so many creative ways that artists and our handlers choose to show textiles. So one thing I've been recently doing is making these frames. They were originally meant for the wall, but I was in the studio one day just moving things around, and I balanced it on the floor, and I realized, oh, that lives on the floor. I didn't know, it's a sculpture. So I've been playing with those more recently. Here's a photo of pieces like those in a space. And I've got little platforms that keep them from falling over. But with these, I'm excited by the ways that they help us see the transparency of the material. These are structured textiles. So I'm working with twill and tabby and some other simple structures. But in my ability to play with that density, I can also create space sort of in between and around. And then I have even more of these pieces. These ones are stretched like you might stretch a conventional canvas. And I think of them as woven paintings, actually. They're just canvases that I'm weaving as I build their abstract surface. Of course, a painting on canvas is a textile too, or rather incorporates textile. It's just in my case and in the case of other people who are showing in their work like this, it is three-dimensional at the same time. These are two newer pieces that I just finished in my studio in the last few months. And then it seems like I have an endless amount of these smaller swatches, which I also make maybe with the end of my warp or the beginning of my warp. They're color studies. They're a way for me to understand my materials and where I want to go ultimately with those larger installations. And I mentioned the knitting machine. These are some pieces that I've been making with the knitting machine recently. So I use a Brother. It's a KH910, if there's anyone here who knows what I'm talking about. It's a domestic knitting machine from the 80s, and I've been able to hack it so that I can upload my own patterns. And I actually today went to the State Library exhibition, the handmade. Has anyone seen that? Well, if you have, you might have noticed there was a knitting machine there, and the artist also hacked hers using a slightly different approach. So I went there today, and I was excited to see someone working in a similar way. Okay, so now I want to talk about a couple of ongoing projects that are more collaborative, more interactive, and more performative in certain cases. And I have a couple of videos too. We might have to be really quiet to get to listen. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is a residency that I'm a co-organizer for called eTextile Spring Break. We're going to be doing it again in October, and it's been iterated over the years in France and in Taiwan and in New York. This time we're going to do it in Michigan, and it's a gathering of e-textile practitioners, so artists or designers who are working between textiles and technology. So it's been fun for me as someone who's done lots of residencies. I'm a residency junkie, I love it, to be on the other side organizing one. Ancient Futures is another collaborative project, and these are actually photos of the work in the gallery. This is maybe my newest project, and it's one I'm really excited by, experimenting with fiber optics. Fiber optics, in this case, I have really sort of thick, crafty ones that I've woven as weft. They function as weft into the textile. But it's also a material that all of us are using all the time. It's the cables that we communicate in order to activate the internet, for example, international telephone calls, et cetera. It's all using fiber optics. So all those cables that run on the bottom of the ocean floor are made up of fiber optics, ones that are much smaller than this, but we transmit information using light. So because I'm interested in how textiles have historically been a form of communication, I've decided to start weaving with fiber optics as a way to explore that. And I invite you afterwards, if you haven't already, to encounter the piece there. It's actually interactive. So there is a microphone and a touch screen, and so you can engage with it, give it a message. I think we're calling them sonic secrets. So you can go in, and there's a sentiment analysis code, which has been designed by my collaborator, Nicole, whereby the message that you give it using English will be translated into a color based on the sentiment. So it's not the sentiment of your tone, it's the sentiment of your language. So if you say something optimistic or sad or anything like that, we have decided on a color that matches these different sentiments. And the fiber optics will adjust over time to demonstrate the collective emotion. So it's still very much a prototype, I'll say. We're playing around with it, but I hope that you all will add a sonic secret because it'll be a part of this growing project. And I'm teaching a workshop next week on weaving with fiber optics here. Another project I'm working on is a cookbook. This I started over the pandemic when I was stuck at home and just thinking about the ways that everything that was going on politically in my country and everywhere, and also the things that I was doing to sort of nourish myself and engage with all of that. So it's a collection of recipes that are written by artists from all around the world, and there's a website that contains them. If there are any artists in the room who might be interested in contributing a recipe, please do, because I'll take them all, and we're going to create a collection of recipes. All the recipes, though, they combine instruction for creating some sort of food and instructions for creating some sort of social change. And the sort of prompt is to think about how those techniques in cooking, like fermentation, chopping, baking, etc., can be metaphors for things like phone banking, protesting, educating, voting, and things like that. So I've already collected about 30 to 40 recipes that are on the website that you can check out. And I'm also kind of shopping around for a publisher to, print all the recipes soon and share it as a cookbook. And there's such a rich history of people using food as a way to convene and organize, and especially, I think, the kitchen and women's work and how that's all connected to making an impact on society. I guess there's a trend showing up here, my interest in food. And I have a project that will come after this too, but this is another project I did over the pandemic. It's called the fermentation quilt, using flexible heaters. So it's a little quilt that you can wrap around your fermentation, your yogurt, your bread starter, etc. And you can enter a simple instruction based on the coded flexible microcontrollers and warm your starter. Cute little cozy thing there. And then another project that connects to food that I call Morden. So I'm actually going to show a video for this. And if I can bear to hear my own voice on the video, I'll play the sound.
In most dinner experiences, our focus is drawn towards the meal, the perceived hero. But there's more than meets the eye. Morden invites viewers to acknowledge the hero not in the meal itself, but in the cloth that the meal is being presented upon, and how the cloth absorbs, reflects, and records human experiences through the intersection of fiber, cultural identity, and food. Prepared to leave lasting marks, each dinner cloth is translated into a canvas, which then becomes an homage to the ingredients, fibers, and persons of a particular evening and place.
I began this project a couple of years ago in my studio with friends because I was interested in experimenting and exploring the relationship between cloth and food and dye and shared experience. As I continued to reiterate it, I learned more about those connections, which led me to collaborating with Kristen to bring it to a larger audience and to invite a larger group of people to share that meal with us. Dyeing cloth and dyeing fiber has been an experience that connects to food for me. I use things from the kitchen a lot: turmeric root, onion skin, avocado pit, spinach, blackberry. There's all these different kinds of things. And sometimes my studio smells like a kitchen. The opportunity to connect the things that we're consuming in this fun way towards creating color on a cloth is really exciting. I've been experimenting with different recipes that can both be delicious and something that we can share as people sharing a meal, but also that are targeted as colors that will leave a mark.
Inspired by the early experiences at home in New York, we were moved to explore Morden beyond our own city. We invited local weavers and chefs to help us craft their own interpretation of Morden, so that each final canvas was an authentic representation of the colors, the people, and the spirit of each location.
Working on this project in Romania with a whole different set of factors, including different people, but also different ingredients in a different setting, was an opportunity for us to really make that shift to performance. Textile creation is a collaboration, just like a group of people deciding to create something with their shared hands. A piece of cloth is only able to survive with the participation of all threads involved. Making food and making textile have, for most of humanity, not been about love. They've been out of necessity. It's only really in this modern era that we can craft a meal with love and have that be the reason that we've crafted it. I believe the strength of it comes from this long history, that it's sort of baked into our identity or to our DNA as humans. I look forward to it being something that is meant to bring people from different walks of life, people who are not already connected to each other, to have a shared experience.
So to summarize, that's a project that I suppose at this point is sort of concluded and behind me. As much fun as it was, especially to collaborate with chefs in other places and weavers in other places. We had planned to go to do another iteration in Korea, but then we had that pandemic. And I have sort of moved on to other things, but it's been a really fun experience. And I'm certainly not the only textile artist or just artist in general who has explored this connection between fiber, food, and natural dye as a performance. So it's been exciting to sort of explore that and see other people working this way too. And the film that we just watched, sort of a friend of a friend heard about the project that I was doing, and she's a filmmaker, so she made that video, and it was sort of the first time that I was engaged with film, and a little awkward in front of the camera, but I started getting more used to it, I guess, or just understanding what film can do. And I'm now working on my own documentary, which I'll show you all the trailer for. Actually, I think I have one more video before that. Yeah, so hold that thought about the documentary. One other project. This is a piece called a piece called Computer 1.0 that I'm making in collaboration with another artist and designer named Julian Goldman, and we together call ourselves Soft Monitor as a sort of design studio. And this is a piece that is woven with hollow tubing, and I will show you a video because it's kinetic.
Most of human history, textile has been the one thing that has connected us all. Technology now has become something that shares that equalizing function. So Computer 1.0 is in part exploring this idea that both technology and textile have this overarching effect on people.
The idea is to try to make a textile become a display, like a computer display. You know, from far away, we see these kind of waves of energy go through it, and we can see these larger scale patterns. But when people get closer, they interpret this information in a different way.
The binary code was originally a weaving draft pattern. So our project is exploring the history of the computer, starting with the loom. We're born into a swaddle and we die with a burial shroud, and no matter your gender or your race, you have an understanding of what cloth is. But we now live in a world where we also have a very intimate and important connection to technology.
We'd like to be able to upload images, upload different woven patterns, maybe text.
If our patterns through the textile are readable by a cell phone, we can use the technology of augmented reality to share even more information about the story of the loom and its connection to the modern computer.
The Luddite revolutions were because of an automated loom. Those kind of predictions of technology were very doomy, were very dystopian. It seems like over and over we end up sort of in the middle of this gradient between utopia and dystopia. One question I think we'd like to raise is, do our lives get better?
So I'm glad that you guys see the video, because the photos, they really don't show it, right? They're constantly moving, and the video does give you a glimpse into the operating system. So just to explain it, it's an intentional series of liquid and air. And there are things like gravity or pressure or, the air will compress and then contract that ultimately scramble those intentional codes and patterns. The piece itself just came down from an exhibition in New York, and it's growing and growing. So every time I weave a new one, making it bigger and bigger, and I would love to sort of cover all the walls and be sort of surrounded by it. And I think that one of the things I quite like about it is that it's water and cotton. We think of it as, and it looks so digital, but the materials are so ancient. So kind of exploring ways that technology can be soft, can be made from materials that aren't just plastic and wire. And then finally, the last video that I want to show you is the sizzle reel trailer for a documentary that I'm working on. Really struggle with work-life balance, got a lot of projects going on. But this is the newest one, and one that I'm super excited about. The trailer that we'll watch is made up primarily of found footage, a little bit of footage that I've collected, but mostly found footage. And it's a tool that I'm using to raise money for the project, as well as pitch it to networks to hopefully get it on a streaming service that you already subscribe to.
When we think of textiles, we usually think of clothing or fabrics, but really it's so much more than that.
I'd like to introduce our MIT biosuit. It literally is a second skin design. That circle will turn elliptical as she moves.
We are currently developing antibacterial medical implants with silk and textile techniques.
Future Floor is a kit designed for women where the woman can make her own sanitary pad with bacteria and wear it in the underwear to treat and prevent candida infection.
These are the materials that power, adorn, and signify our human life. Women's textile skills have been behind some of the world's biggest innovations, but we've mostly been left out of the stories that define those industries.
We are missing half of the story.
As many of us, I use textiles every day and I don't really realize it. I like to be inspired by ancient things to create new ones.
These stories have really been undocumented. Until now.
We'd never get to the moon if we always did it the same old way.